Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another edition of Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arleth. The Coalition of the Willing, Ukraine and the United States met in Paris this week, reaffirming their commitment to just, lasting peace for Ukraine. They stressed that Ukraine's self-defense capability is vital for its security and Euro-Atlantic stability. Any peace deal must include strong, lasting security guarantees for Ukraine, backed by politically and legally binding commitments after a ceasefire. These guarantees cover ceasefire monitoring, a continued long-term military aid, a possible European-led multinational reassurance force, and firm support against any future Russian attack. But the devil is in the details. Is that for all of these things to happen, a ceasefire must take place first, something that Moscow is unlikely to agree to. Meanwhile, attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have been devastating. Hundreds of thousands of people were left without power, running water, and heat. Even Kyiv's mayor said on Friday that people should leave the capital if they can secure more favorable conditions elsewhere in the country. We'll break down these developments with our guests, but first, let's take a look at this report from Ukraine this week. The Paris Declaration was signed on Tuesday, after Ukraine's allies finally agreed on key aspects of post-war security guarantees, including declarations by France and Britain to send troops to Ukraine if a ceasefire is reached.
These documents exist, and they signal how seriously both Europe and the entire coalition are prepared to work for real security.
For the first time, the U.S. has backed a broad coalition of Ukraine's allies in committing to security guarantees. According to the almost finalized U.S. protocol, they are meant to
A, deter any attacks, any further attacks in Ukraine, and B, if there are any attacks, they're meant to defend, and they will do both.
But Kyiv wants the guarantees to be legally binding, and Ukraine's president says a bilateral document on U.S. security guarantees is ready to be taken to Washington to be signed by top-level officials. But there's one major catch. A ceasefire by the aggressor looks increasingly unlikely, especially after the British Prime Minister's statements on possible NATO troops on the ground.
The UK and France will establish military hubs across Ukraine and build protected facilities for weapons and military equipment to support Ukraine's defensive needs.
And Moscow, speaking for the first time since the summit in Paris, called the statements completely unacceptable if Russia is to end its assault. At an Orthodox Christmas service, Putin signaled that any peace deal remains far from reality and hailed his troops' holy mission to defend Russia.
We often call the Lord our Savior because he came to earth to save all people. Likewise, Russia's soldiers have always, as if at the Lord's behest, carried out this mission of defending the fatherland and its people.
And Russia shows no sign of stopping. Overnight on Thursday, Russia for the second time launched an Oreshnik hypersonic nuclear-capable missile at the Lviv region. The ballistic missile struck critical infrastructure that night, just 60 kilometers from the Polish border.
Such a strike close to EU and NATO border is a great threat to the security on the European continent and a test for the transatlantic community. We demand strong responses to Russia's reckless actions. We will be initiating international action, an urgent meeting of the UN Security Council, a meeting of the Ukraine-NATO Council.
The missile is capable of carrying nuclear warheads, but was not used in the attack. Ukrainians believe Putin deployed it primarily to spread fear. Russia's claims gave its forces a green light to terrorize Ukrainians. On Thursday night, in addition to the Oreshnik attack, a massive strike hit Kyiv, killing at least 4, including an ambulance crew member. He was killed during a second strike on the same residential building while providing medical assistance to victims of the first strike. Thousands of households remain without power and heat, and water supplies are disrupted in the capital. A total of 242 drones and 25 missiles were launched overnight.
The attack took place exactly where there was a significant cold spell, aimed precisely against the normal life of ordinary people. A clear reaction from the world is needed, above all from the United States, whose signals Russia truly pays attention to.
Additionally, this week alone, Russia targeted multiple energy facilities in the Zaporizhia, Dnipropetrovsk, and Chernihiv regions. In the Dnipropetrovsk region alone, 800,000 households were left without heat and power. And now joining us to discuss the developments of the week is Hanna Shelest, Director of the Security Programs at Ukrainian Prism. Hello, Hanna, and thank you so much for joining us on Ukraine this week.
Hello, my pleasure.
Yes, now we have the Coalition of the Willing and the Paris Declaration. In your opinion, how different was this meeting from all of the other ones that we've seen, concerning the Coalition of the Willing?
First of all, I think that we need to pay attention to those participants that we had there. And if previously we used to think about the Coalition of Willing predominantly as the coalition of the European states, plus Americans and Canadians, but this time we had representatives from Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, who have been quite actively participating in different meetings before, but also Turkey. And Turkey even been stating regarding their opportunities to guarantee the security in the Black Sea. So that really makes this coalition of willing wider than initial idea of the several European states that are ready to make the next steps for the security. At the same time, we understand that there is still no total unity. We see the separate document signed just by France, United Kingdom, and Ukraine. We also know that Americans had a little bit external position, if you can say like this, but they were trying to position themselves more of the mediators rather than part of this coalition of willing. So it is Europeans and them. And that is very important to emphasize. But also because we heard about the framework, and we understand that that is the big political will signed, but now it is the very detailed and very tiny work of the diplomats to put all those political frameworks into the active action plan.
Right. Now, in terms, we hear so much about security guarantees. What are the main security guarantees that Ukraine was able to secure at this meeting? What did the United States agree to provide Ukrainians if indeed a ceasefire does take place?
Ukrainians have problem with the word guarantees since 1994, since so-called Budapest Memorandum, because that document, when Ukraine rejected the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world, in Russian and Ukrainian version, it is named about security guarantees, when in the original English version, it is just assurances. So we are really very careful with the word guarantees because nothing there is automatic. We still need political will. So guarantees is just a strong word, but do we really have something that can for 100% secure us or defend us? Unfortunately, no, and I think that it is impossible to create something like this. Even Article 5 of NATO is not a total security guarantee, it just gives the possibilities and opportunities to do something, but it doesn't invoke all mechanisms immediately or deploy forces somewhere. What is important, it seems to me, that finally we hear about the forces on the ground. Finally, we hear about the necessity to develop a clear mechanism for monitoring and of the processes, what is happening in case it is violated. So in this case, I think that we have a step forward compared to the last year discussions, for example. But the biggest problem is definitely the American position. Because as for now, we, at least what I heard, and probably till we see all final documents, that's just my interpretation, but de facto we would have European guarantees, and Americans will guarantee not to Ukrainians, but to Europeans that they will support in case something is happening. And that is a little bit of the indirect. I think that considering Russian attitude towards Americans, that would not be enough.
Right, and Donald Trump, in an interview with the New York Times, recently said that he's more or less betting on the fact that Russia won't reinvade or there will be no further acts of aggression from Russia on Ukraine And just with this premise, I mean, this is completely shows a lack of understanding for the historical context and what Russia has done essentially since 2014. Multiple times has it broken any ceasefire agreements that they had in the Donbass, for instance.
It's not only about breaking the ceasefire agreements, because Russia violated a lot of their own obligations, not only in Ukraine, but if you remember the Russian actions in Transnistria, in Moldova, or in a Russian-Georgian war and the obligations after these. So it's classical that Russians are traditionally violating what they agreed by themselves. What is more important for me is that we definitely see the American side that would like to see the best from the Russians. It's wishful thinking. For example, if you remember a few months ago, there were statements that if it is American business in Ukraine, Russians would never attack. Just 2 days ago, Russians totally destroyed one of the biggest American enterprise in Dnipro city. Bange. So doesn't matter, it is American enterprise or not. We had the same with the American investments in Odessa region, for example. So here, I'm afraid that it would be absolutely the same. The only real guarantee, if you would ask me, it is the proper demilitarization of the Russian Federation. And we understand that that's what the United States doesn't want at all.
Right. Now, back to what they agreed upon in Paris. You know, who do you think that, who is going to lead this ceasefire monitoring and the verification mechanism that's mentioned in that declaration? What role is the coalition going to play in this process?
Coalition is very important. We still know that this document is developed, so we don't know about the lead, but de facto that would be 2 stages at least. Stage number 1, it is the boots on the ground. So we can imagine that it should be some kind of the mission, some monitors, like for example, we used to have OSCE, a special monitoring mission. And it can be under the United Nations, it can be a separate multinational contingent. There can be different modalities for these people on the ground, in the field, because you really need to patrol the contact zone between 2 sides to see from where, like to make investigations, if any provocations or something like this. That's what we see in any conflict around the globe. Nobody can imagine anything new. But the second stage is very important, and that's where Europeans are hoping for the significant American involvement. It is the satellites. That's all those special equipment of different levels that we have. Because we understand that we are speaking about 1,000 kilometers of the contact line. It is a huge territory. It's not one village where you need to monitor it. So you need satellites, you need the American airplanes, as we have now, for example, monitoring the Black Sea and the northern Black Sea coast. That can be any type, other type of the technical equipment that we may need to prove, especially when we don't have at the certain area the people that can verify it.
The devil's in the details in that, you know, we can't have any security guarantees or any reassurance forces or anything of that nature until Vladimir Putin finally commits to a ceasefire, which at the moment certainly doesn't look like that's going to happen, and anytime soon. Zelensky says that pressure needs to be applied on Russia right now, that Vladimir Putin needs to feel that he made a bad decision by launching this war, continuing this war. What type of pressure is it that you think can actually make a difference to get Vladimir Putin to even consider a ceasefire?
You know, what we really noticed within the last 11 years, and even more within the last 4 years, that Russians are calling for negotiations each time when the United States is promising the new package of sanctions. As soon as we are speaking about the increase and significant increase of sanctions, they're immediately calling for negotiations. Sometimes it's just to postpone or to drag the time, like not to allow their, but that's something what they're really afraid, despite all the bravura statements that sanctions doesn't work. Sanctions work. They just have a long-term effect, not immediate effect very often. So we just heard yesterday that Congress received a green light with the adoption of the new package of sanctions. Who knows? Maybe that will make Russians at least to agree for the temporary things. But at the same time, I'm afraid that that would be not enough. Because now, if you follow all the Russian statements, they feel that they're advancing. They think that they still can get more territories on the ground. And when Ukraine, for example, proposed a Christmas ceasefire, they rejected it immediately. So even the short doesn't work. They think that they can push and persuade Americans. And here we really need to see the active measures from the United States side. Only these can push the Russian side at least to sit again at the negotiation table. But if they think that they can manipulate with the White House, they will do it. And also the previous negotiations, what we remember, that even during the negotiations, they're increasing attacks against Ukraine because they think that till the very last moment that they can gain more and they can pressure Ukraine more with such actions. So no goodwill expected till anything's signed.
Right. So I imagine you'd want to see these secondary tariffs upwards of, around 500% put on countries like China, like India, perhaps Brazil, for their purchases of Russian oil. But we've also seen something quite significant this week, which is Americans seizing, essentially, Russian shadow fleet tankers. Do you think that this type of action, and especially if spearheaded by the Europeans, would make a dent in Vladimir Putin's decision-making as to whether or not he wants to continue?
War is expensive. Russians need money. That's clear. And their main money are coming not because the economy is booming, but because of the oil and gas prices. And because they've been able to sell them all these years to the world market. And most of this selling being not legal, but illegal through the shadow fleet, through the manipulations. And Ukraine been asking for the sanctions against the shadow fleet for the last 3 years at least. And unfortunately, these sanctions were very weak and very much delayed. The fact that Americans started to seize the Russian ships, already we have 5 ships being captured, it is the very important signal. It is a demonstration that the US side also is capable to act asymmetrical. And I think that this should be considered more as the signal rather than it would not change significantly the situation, but it is a very strong political and security signal that Americans are ready to press the Russians, at least to agree to the certain negotiations or to the certain conditions. But in terms of the budget for the war, that is not enough.
Certainly it's not. Another issue that we see, obviously, is the situation of manpower on the front lines. We see Russia, despite the fact that we see Russians on horseback with Starlink, and we think that this is, a total disaster and it's funny. Well, Russia continues to inch forward, and the graveyards are getting bigger in Ukraine. My question now is, what is going to be done from the Ukrainian side should this war continue throughout 2026? Is there anybody left to fight? Is there enough people to train? What is the situation on the front line going to look like without a different type of intervention from the West or Western partners?
The situation with the personnel is difficult for both sides because as for now, we see more and more foreigners that Russians are trying to involve in their armed forces. So despite being several times bigger in terms of the personnel, we see now thousands of North Koreans. We see the very strong recruitment that is happening in India, in African countries, in Latin America. And that is a demonstration that they are lacking their own personnel. Why? Because they're afraid to announce a full mobilization, and mobilization in such cities like Moscow, St. Petersburg, so in the big city with the money, with the social active population, because they understand what type of the social unrest it can bring to the Russian Federation. The question is how long they will be able not to announce this total mobilization. From the Ukrainian side, we understand that we are 3 times smaller. And definitely, even that our losses in terms of people being much less due to the proper tactical medicine and a lot of the other stuff involved due to the NATO reforms in the Ukrainian armed forces. But still, people are dying. You are absolutely right. Armed forces are tired, and we have some of the difficulties with the mobilization. Let's be honest, that's normal for people not to want to fight. The question is what motivation they have. And now we see a strong recruitment from the brigades themselves. That's what Ukrainian armed forces chose to do, in addition to the, state policy or some bad incidents that we have. But those brigades with a good reputation, they started their own HR recruitment, PR, you can call it as much as you want, with the videos in internet, with the big boards around the cities, because their reputation works the best. Is it difficult for Ukraine? Absolutely. Here are no questions, and it would become more and more difficult. But at the same time, it is the clear understanding, if we are not continuing fighting till it is necessary to do, if the negotiations are failing, and you see that Ukraine is trying to continue these negotiations, Ukraine would just stop existing. So we have the best motivation over there. Either you have your country or you're becoming the second Russia. And that's not the way Ukraine would like to be.
Absolutely understood. Energy infrastructure is another issue that we've seen this week. Many of the grids across the country are shattered. The mayor of Kyiv has told people to leave voluntarily the city to reduce the pressure on the existing, what is existing and continuing to function. Now, according to forecast, temperatures in Kyiv next week will drop to as low as -11 and -17 at night. Are we going to see this winter pose very big problems for the population centers in Ukraine?
The latest strike, especially what's happened this night, is the huge disaster for Kyiv. And in Odessa, just a few weeks ago, we had 4 days of the total blackout. So Russian target is all the critical energy and heating infrastructure of the cities. That's how they fight instead of fighting the armed forces. But we need to remember that is not the first time that Russians tried the blackouts of Ukraine last winter as well. So people are trying to be prepared where it is possible. A lot of people had generators, power banks, all types of the alternative sources of energy. You are definitely buying the warm clothes and you're understanding how you're packing yourself at home. Today I was reading the like all my Kyiv friends and the social networks, somebody been sharing how they bought the warm clothes or the blankets with the, this electric heating additional from the power banks, or how in their chats for the houses, people been sharing who has what, where you can charge your batteries, where you can go to warm. And people are actually proposing sometimes to move from one neighborhood to another, where it is better situation with electricity, or if somebody has their houses in the villages, for example, if your work allow you to be there for some days. So is it difficult? Yes, extremely. But people have been preparing because that is the third winter that Russia is taking this tactic.
Right. Well, final question here as we run out of time. We saw the second use of the Oreshnik mid-range ballistic missile rain down on Lviv. Why do you think Vladimir Putin used that particular type of weapon? Did it create any kind of major results that would be different from using any kind of different weapon? How should we read into that, I guess, is the question.
Oreshnik is more about PR because everybody been afraid that is this promoted as the new type of the weapon, something like for the doomsday. But de facto, Oreshnik is not that dangerous. First of all, it is the development of 1980s, so quite old. The second is that, yes, it is very quick, it is difficult to identify it, and it is dangerous in case it is nuclear, because it is capable to bear the nuclear warheads. But without this, it is just like 36 artillery grenades. So the destruction from it is not that dangerous as, for example, from Kinjal or even from Kaliber, when it is one big missile targeting something. So considering that it is only the second one within the last 2 years, and that for Russia it was just important to demonstrate that we are ready to use something what all news would speak about. So it is more about their posing, as we would say in English, rather than the actual military results that they can gain of using this.
Okay, Hanna Shelest, Director of Security Programs at Ukrainian Prism, thank you so much for this conversation. Very much appreciate it. And that's all the time we have on this edition of Ukraine This Week. Join us again next week for all the latest from the war in Ukraine. Thanks for watching and hope to see you then. Goodbye.